Okay, sorry about that. My sidekick Seamus, who usually does that for me, I run the boards when he's in here doing the music events, and he runs the boards, and I'm in here doing the lectures. And he found a dog, and he's trying to find the dog's parents right now. So Seamus is a good egg. So anyway, welcome again. We're live. The recording that I just started, will be available on our Facebook page, on YouTube, and on our website. So if you want to come back to it, we'll try to have it up in a week or two. We usually like to go through it and edit it down and piece it together, so stuff like I just did won't be so publicly obvious. But we do have a schedule of music coming up. Our next one, and this is a big one, Wednesday, August 18th, here in this room, 6 until 8, Bobby Black Hat Band, very popular here with us. Then in September, our September 15th, front porch music will be Brackish Water Jamboree, and we have scheduled through the end of the year. And we're working hard to schedule more lectures, and we'll let you know those as they hit the books. You can always go to our website and find those things out for us. So, but tonight, I want to tell you a little, from what I gather from what I've seen going on here, as a lot of you know Vince already. So, but I'm going to read his bona fides here, if you don't mind. Vincent J. Serio III, Vince, is the grandson of Vincent J. Serio Sr., the designer and original builder of the Hampton One-Design. Vince grew up in Richmond, Virginia, graduated from Benedictine High School, and received his Bachelor's of Science degree at Virginia Tech. He earned a Master's of Science before graduating from the Medical College of Virginia as a Doctor of Medicine in 1995. He moved to Boise, Idaho to complete his residency in family medicine. And Vince has practiced medicine for the past 25 years there in Idaho, and is now an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Washington School of Medicine. He teaches on faculty of the Family Medicine Residency of Idaho in Boise, and he's a member of the American Academy of Family Physicians and the Wilderness Medical Society. So he does things besides boats. In 1994, he sailed for the first time on his cousin Sal Serio's Hampton One-Design in the Serio Regatta. I think we have video of that upstairs. Is that the one that you took the video of? Mm-hmm. This began a new awakening to the family boat building legacy and a lifelong interest in the sport of sailing and all things nautical. In 2001, he published an article in Wooden Boat magazine about his grandfather's work, which helped me greatly in the exhibit we have upstairs. And 2012, he served as ship's physician for the Semester at Sea program, traveling to 17 cities in 13 countries on 5 continents in 100 days. That's a pretty good gig. He restored Hampton One-Design number 342 in 2009 and races McGregor 26 in the local sailing club in Idaho. He is a board member of the Southern Idaho Sailing Outreach Program, which conducts sailing camps for youth in Idaho. Vince is a U.S. sailing certified instructor. He lives in Boise with his wife Catherine and his daughters Lilia and Sophia. And before I turn you over to Vince, I do want to remind you that we have the gallery upstairs open. So when the lecture is over, I will go up there, and you are welcome to come up and join me to have a look at the exhibit. The exhibit will be coming down August 22nd, and we'll be preparing our next exhibit in the space. That is, upstairs is our changing exhibit gallery. You all would have been given a raffle ticket on the way in. We will be at the very end of the lecture. I will go get the raffle tickets, and we will be giving away that wonderful painting that you see on the front desk. Just as a matter of public awareness and due diligence, I bought a raffle ticket because I like that painting too. So if I should win it, I will allow someone else to draw the tickets. But I have a ticket in the bin as well. So there you go. Vince, come on up.
Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. I'm on mic. Can you hear me okay back there, Alan? Sound good? Okay. Thanks for coming tonight. I really didn't expect this many people. We had a kind of a quick turnaround on this lecture, but I really appreciate everybody coming out. So after that introduction, I was thinking, is like people saying, well, he likes all things nautical. What's he doing living in Idaho? Well, Idaho is a state where you can go skiing in the morning, and then in the afternoon go down into the valley and sail on on a huge lake. So it's a great place to live. There is sailing there. We're getting a great youth sailing program going. Our goal is to have an Olympic sailor one day, and we're not quite there yet. So what I want to do tonight is talk to you a little bit about what I call a boat builder's legacy, talking about my grandfather's work with the Hampton One-Design, his boat building work, just something I'm incredibly proud of. And I could talk all night about it, but I thought that I would probably put myself in a kind of an outline, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what got me interested in this. We'll talk about my grandfather, how he began in life, some of the hardships that he had and overcame, and how he learned the trade of boat building, became a master craftsman, kind of built a reputation here in the area. I've already talked to some people tonight that kind of knew him. And then he broke into the yacht club community and because of his work, and was just a fixture in the community. Then we're going to go to a Jeopardy category called Let's Build a Hampton, and show you how he built a Hampton from the ground up. And then finally we'll talk about legacies. So this was a boat built in the 1930s. His work was generally from the 1930s to the 1960s. Some of his work still carries forward today. So it's something I'm very proud of as well. So let me go back to this. So first of all, I think my grandfather is a really cool guy. He was just a really neat guy. And there he is on the left there in front of his house on James River Drive, 123 James River Drive in Newport News. And it's really inspiring to me to know that this guy came over from Sicily at age 4 and built a life here in the United States, starting off in downtown Newport News, and then eventually living in the neighborhood with the mayor of the city of Newport News, and the president of the Newport News shipbuilding. So he really was part of the community and worked hard to get there, and is very inspiring to me when I have tough times and think that I have it tough. So there I am. I didn't know my grandfather very well. He died when I was 5 years old. But the one thing that I really remember about him the most is just the way that he smelled, and everything in his house that smelled that way. And the odor was cedar. And the cedar was what he used to plank his boats. And it had a very distinctive smell. I went out and I stuck my nose in the boat out in the front. You really can't smell it. It fades over the years, and then varnish covers the cedar. But if you ever get a chance to see an old wooden boat and you smell that cedar, that's what I think about when I think about my grandfather. So let me talk to you a little bit about my spark, and I just talked about the cedar. My father had a very fine example of a Hampton One-Design, number 613. And, I'm the youngest of the youngest in my family. I'm the tail end of it. And so my dad was kind of old when I was born already, and he had no interest in getting out in a small sailboat after I was born. So I never actually sailed in a Hampton One-Design until I was in my mid-20s or early 30s. So, but what I do remember is going into the garage and climbing into the boat that was forbidden territories underneath a black cover. I'd crawl up underneath there on the deck. There was all kinds of neat stuff inside there, and I can just remember that cedar smell still. So that kind of got me interested. And then in 1994, my cousin Sal Serio, who is shown here sailing his boat, number 614, also a Serio-built boat, invited me to crew with him on in the Serio Regatta. It was the 60th anniversary of the Hampton One-Design. And so I said, that's great. That sounds wonderful. It looks fun to me. The winds that day were about 15 to 20 knots. It was a pretty blowing day for a Hampton, which is really designed for light air here in the lower Chesapeake. And we really had that thing heeled up on its side. And I had no idea that was kind of a dangerous thing, and you want to try to avoid that and keep the boat flat. But I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And I got back to the Hampton Yacht Club, and I was bleeding all over the place from running into the hardware. So, but I was hooked. I mean, it was something that was connected to me in a family way. It was very visceral, being out on the water. It was just a wonderful experience. So then I was in the bookshop. I think my sister sent me a subscription to Wooden Boat, but I found this book called Build a Boat, and I was like, that sounds kind of fun. I think I'll do that myself. My grandfather did it. How hard could it be? And so I started off with what was called a 6-hour canoe, and I was in the middle of my medical residency and doing all that stuff. But it took me about 6 months to build this thing, but it's a great excuse to buy tools and drive your wife crazy and neighbors as well with all the noise. So we built that. That was my first introduction to boat building. And then this guy right here, and the pointer doesn't work on the television, but that's my dad, Vincent Jr. And whoa, I don't know what happened there. Light sensor. Anyway, so the Italians are not very creative. We name each other after each other. And so Vincent Sr., the guy we're talking about tonight, that's my grandfather. My dad is Vincent Jr., and then I'm Vincent III. So you get a lot of Vincents in this lecture, and so I want you to know who the main characters are here. But my dad, Vincent Jr., frankly, my dad was a hoarder, and there's a guy out here in the audience that knows this. My friend Matt, who I've known since I was 10 years old, would come over to my house, and we just had stuff everywhere, and a lot of it was my grandfather's stuff. Parts of boats and patterns and jigs, and my dad kept it all, and it drove us all crazy as a family. My sister had to deal with a lot of it after he died, but luckily we have all that stuff and had it, and I thank Alan and the museum for taking a lot of that off of my hands and putting it where it needs to be in a preserved space. So my dad not only provided a lot of what you're going to see upstairs, but also I sat down with him and I did a 4-hour interview with him on video. So a lot of the quotes that you'll see tonight are from that video, verbatim from my dad's mouth, and also helped me in 2001 to write an article about this for Wooden Boat magazine. So he was a phenomenal store of knowledge. My dad was an engineer. I couldn't believe that he remembered, the size of the screws and the thickness of the planks on the Hampton One-Design. That was his engineer's brain, and that's what he tuned into. So thanks to Dad, who's no longer with us. So let's talk about how Vincent Sr. got started. And again, we had a little trouble converting from Apple to this format, and so I've lost a few things like quotations and who made the quotes. But this is a quote from my grandfather when he was talking about it, and you'll see the bigger quote. But he was proud to have built a nice boat for everybody, and I'll talk more about that picture later as well. So my grandfather from this little island here called Sicily, and Sicily is at the bottom of Italy, Italy known as a boot sometimes, and so they say that Sicily is the thing that gets kicked by the boot, and part of that is that Sicily is very culturally different from the rest of Italy. Northern Italians are very different from Southern Italians, are very different from Sicilians, and part of that is because Sicily sits right in the middle of the Mediterranean, and all kinds of cultures have gone there. It's been conquered by almost every major civilization since the beginning of time. And around the turn of the century, first 1900, not the 21st, but the 20th century, Sicily was in turmoil. It was economically depressed. It was crime-ridden. And as we know today, that's what drives immigrants to other countries. And so that's kind of where this story starts about immigration to the United States. And so here's his little town, Cefalù, which is on the northern shore of Sicily. And it's a boating town. There's fishermen, there's boat building activities. It's named after this big rock back there, which supposedly looks like a head. La Roca is what they call it. And if you've ever seen a movie called Cinema Paradiso, that's filmed in Cefalù. So if you haven't seen that, it's a wonderful film. And shows you the character of that little town. But Sicily at that time, in 1901, when he moved to the United States, was a very depressed, terrible place to live. There was no education. There was famine. People wanted to get out. And the United States was where they were going, along with a lot of other people in Europe at that time. So he sails at age 4 on the SS Spartan Prince. And you can find this stuff on the internet because there's thousands of children of immigrants that want to know where their family came from. So I simply searched my grandfather's name, and then I know the ship that he came in on. I know the day that he came into the United States. So here are the immigrants as they come in, and then here's the manifest of the ship with his name here, age 4, and he came with 2 siblings and his mother. Now, he was the youngest of 13 children, so the 3 youngest came after Dad, Filippo, had come to the United States and got a foothold in the States. And he was a merchant mariner, Filippo, and he undoubtedly had come to many of the ports in the United States, probably also the Hampton Roads because it was a major port. So that's where they came to settle. And so coming into the United States as an immigrant in the early 1900s, there was a lot of anti-immigration bias at that time. There were anti-immigration laws that were passed, and eventually immigration from Europe declined. So you get here, you don't speak the language, you don't have an education. So what happens is the Catholic Church, which is big in Italy, of course, they set up churches and they set up schools to teach the children. And so this is St. Vincent's school in downtown Newport News, no longer there, now Peninsula Catholic. And the Catholic brothers were in charge of the school. And so legend is my grandfather went to the Catholic school. He was particularly adept at penmanship and neatness with his drawing, as well as mathematics. He played the violin. He's a left brain, right brain kind of guy. Probably my favorite picture of my grandfather. It shows him at age 11 with his hand on his father's shoulder. And so a couple of things in this picture to point out. Just look how proud that little guy is. He's probably 10 or 11. As an aging father, his father was in his 50s when he was born. So he would be probably in his early 60s here, which is old for 16 or so. My grandfather had to drop out of school to take care of the elderly parents and also the other children, and he worked in a grocery. So he dropped out of school and basically in the 6th grade, but every foundation that he had from the Catholic Brothers School kind of carried him forward from there. So he worked in a grocery, but the legend was that every spare moment that he had, he'd walk down 6 blocks from his house, which was at 34th and Virginia Avenue, now Warwick Boulevard in Newport News, and he could be at one of the largest shipbuilding facilities in the world. And so he went down and he studied and looked at the boats and probably admired, the lines of everything that was being built. It was just a smorgasbord for a young guy. This is undoubtedly where it sparked his interest in boats and boat building. So around this time, there were all kinds of books and magazines that were marketed to children. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would surmise that he probably picked up one of these magazines, and you could figure out how to make a campfire or build a birdhouse or even maybe build a boat from some of these magazines. And you've seen them. Popular Mechanics. These are, things that have been around for ages in the United States, marketed towards, children and skills and trades. So as legend has it, he built a boat out of orange crates from the grocery. and fashioned a mast and a bedsheet as a sail and took it down to the James River. And his mother was horrified, went with him, was terrified that he wasn't going to make it, but legend is that the boat sailed fine and didn't sink, and he was off to the races after that. So then comes love, and then comes marriage, and then comes little Vincent Jr. in the baby carriage, and you have to kind of get a real job. And so part of what was going on at the time, again, he was an immigrant. He didn't have his citizenship. He wanted to join the Navy during World War I. Couldn't do that because he was not a citizen, so he went to work at the Newport News Shipyard. And so that's kind of how he got started in the trade of boat building. So this picture, again, Newport News Shipyard, shows an area known as the mold loft, okay? And so the reason it's called the mold loft is, first of all, it's a loft, so that ships and other work would be done in a building down below this level, and the loft was empty space, and it was above everything. And you could put a long flat floor out, and you could lay out the lines of your ship or the boat that you were building and make patterns so that you could transfer that to the boat or the ship that you were building. And so, for example, what we're looking at is a boat builder's or a naval architect's drawing of a ship, typical ship perhaps, and it's in 2 dimensions. And you have to take a drawing from 2 dimensions and make it into a 3-dimensional structure. And real boats aren't flat, they have curves, they have height, they have 3 dimensions. So that's the function of the loftsman, the people that work in the loft, to take the drawings and make them into full-size patterns, which can then be laid on the steel, cut out, and then the workers can construct the ship. So that's a pattern, and then there are things called molds, which are more 3-dimensional, and so this shows maybe a curved surface that would have been transferred to a piece of steel. So my father told me, because of his meticulous ability to deal with dimensions and accuracy, we talked about his mathematics skills, that they found this was a good place to put him. And so he learned how to be exact, and he used these patterns and jigs, which you will see upstairs, to essentially be a factory, to make hundreds of small boats, but still have that craftsman's skill and hand in each boat that he built. So that's kind of how he got started. So after the mold loft, we think that he probably got more interested in small boat construction because, working in the shipyard is hard work, right? It's sweaty, it's dirty, so no, I'm not sure I want to do that. I want to build boats that I want to build. And so he went to the U.S. Coast Guard Yard in Curtis Bay, Maryland, which at the time had a very good reputation for small boat building. So that's where we think he learned, the fit and finish of how to make a wooden boat in those days, and one of the premier places in the nation that was making those. And then he worked for a short time on stern paddle wheelers on the Ohio River. Don't think he enjoyed that too much. It was far away from home. And then he comes back to Newport News, works again in the shipyard for a little bit, and then on the side starts building boats. And he first started building them at his house at 34th and Virginia Avenue, the family home, and under a 50-foot lean-to that he constructed next to the house. And he built some actually very big boats there. This was not one of them, but it's just to kind of get you started in this. So then he moved down to the small boat harbor in Newport News. It's right at the foot of the peninsula, right now where 664 goes across the bay, the new bridge tunnel. That's where the small boat harbor was, and it was the center of small boat building and repair in those days. And so this just shows a picture of him with a speedboat that he did not build, Maybe the Dodge Speedboat company, which was located in that area, may have built this boat, but he had hauled it up and had refinished it. So he did refinishing, he had new construction, started this on the side, then quit his job at the shipyard, and then moved to this structure, which is his first boat building shop at the small boat harbor. He hated the shop. It was dark. It had a dirt floor. It was rat infested. It was just not a very fun place to build a boat. So I stuck this in there because I do know that he's subscribed to the Rudder. And the Rudder at the time was kind of like Wooden Boat Magazine is now. It was filled with articles about boat building. You know, you could actually have the how-to pictures there in this magazine, and then just everything to do with yachting and fine boat building. So we know that he subscribed to that because Dad, the hoarder, had all of them. And but this is what my dad would say, that he would have, spend all of his time reading, studying, going down, looking at other boat builders. You know, the man was obsessed with boats. And it was interesting to hear my sister the other day when I practiced this say, oh yeah, I remember those all over his house, the Rudder magazine. So another view of the boat shop at the small boat harbor, and the reason I included this was for a couple of reasons. So this is where the family was living, in this little house. Not sure who built it or how it got there, but my father grew up in the boatyard next to my grandfather and his work. So he witnessed a lot of this as a young person and absorbed it all, and I'm sure learned a lot of his engineering interest from that. But this shows some smaller boats that were being built at the time. And a lot of these you can see, if you'll go back and look at the Hampton, a lot of the similar characteristics. The combing around the edge of the boat with what is called an ogee, a little kind of dip in the back of the combing. That was a particularly signature mark of my grandfather's work. And a bright transom on the boat, so not painted, bright with varnish to show off the beautiful mahogany. And then, like Henry Ford, you have one color for a car. You can have any color you want, black. For him, it was white. So as he got started there, he not only built small boats, but he started building larger boats. And I want to say this is about a 30 to 36-foot boat designed by William Hand, a naval architect. And this is called the Loaf-Along. And the Loaf-Along was built for Judge Walcott, who was a judge in Norfolk and part of the Norfolk Country Club and Yacht Club. Actually, he built this boat twice. The first time, one of the workers left a blowtorch on board, and it burned to the water line. So then it had to be rebuilt again. So this is Loaf-Along, and it's a fine boat, and it shows you not only the craftsmanship, but the size of things that he was building at the time. And he employed people in his boatyard for sure. And at the height of the boatyard, he could haul a boat up to 125 feet in length and work on it. I don't think he built anything that big, but he could work on it. And then there's Vincent Jr. in a small rowboat that he built that my grandfather built for him. I still have this hanging in my garage. It's not going in the museum. But you can still see some of the building details, which are similar. So then he builds his dream shop. This is every woodworker's dream, is to have a good shop where you can do work. And this shop had wooden floors that were comfortable to stand on. And it had these huge windows on the side. And my father said that, Vincent Sr. said, I really need a place where I have a lot of light. And so, these windows let in light for boat building, in addition to the electricity that was inside as well. But this shop was built in 1933 and served my grandfather until the late 1940s, when he sold it. And there's just another view of the shop. And it was a full-service operation. He sold hardware, he sold paint, of course, hauled boats and repaired and finished them, as well as building a Hampton like you see there.
Where was that shop?
So that's the small boat harbor in Newport News. And so that would be, all the other shots were on the other side where the water is. And I'm sorry I didn't give you a picture of the small boat harbor, but basically it's like a canal that kind of was cut into the, I want to say maybe Newport News Creek maybe, and then it kind of filters into that, and then it was kind of dredged out and made into a small boat harbor that was a little wider. But anyway, so that's the view you're seeing. So where did the Hampton One-Design come from? Let's talk a little bit about that. So these characters were some of the first members of the Hampton Yacht Club. And the legend is this guy right here on the left, Harold Jurgensen, was one of the founders, if not the founder. And he would keep his boat moored in the Hampton River, and someone had broken into it. This was during Prohibition, and pilfered all of the liquor that was on board that was prized. And he says, we're not going to have any of that. We're going to put a yacht club together where things are secure. And so they used the old Virginia Yacht Club, which I think still stands on the site where the Hampton Yacht Club is today, to conduct their yacht club activities. So here's some of the early members. You see the classic burgee. I see it on somebody's polo shirt back there. And then Vincent Serio here. So he was on the board of directors, served on the race committees. So he was in the middle of this boating culture. And one of the things that was lacking in the Hampton Yacht Club was a boat that could be raced, for the youth and for the members. And so they're very excited about figuring out a boat to have for the club. And so this is a quote that we attribute to my grandfather. They wanted to build a boat for racing. But he said, this is a boat that anybody can use. It can be handled singly, sailed by children. He really wanted it to be an all-around good boat. Very popular design at the time was a starboat. The starboat was built in the early 1900s and was really one of the premier sailing classes internationally, and has been until recently. In fact, I think this year perhaps was the last year, or the only year that it hasn't been in the Olympics. So it has been withdrawn from the Olympics as a class. But it's a very famous class, and some of the Hampton Yacht Club members had these boats. Some of them raced in the nationals and international star class racing, and my grandfather built a few of those as well. So one of the people that he built a starboat for was Sidney A. Vincent. So I'll get back to that in just a second, but I put this slide up because it shows really in this era a lot of boats had a lot of the same design features. And so you can see some similarities with the Hampton One-Design and the Star class, and then another popular Chesapeake class, the Comet, which is out of St. Michael's, Maryland, and up in that area. The Star, I think people were very excited about it. But it had a problem, and that was it had a fixed keel, and that was very difficult to get in and out of the mouth of the Hampton River. And so that just wouldn't do. And it was also a much larger boat, over 20 feet or maybe 20 feet, more expensive to build. Remember, this is the Depression, and so that just wouldn't do. The Comet, 16-foot, kind of clumsier appearance, in my opinion, smaller sail area. There are heavier winds up north in the northern part of the Chesapeake Bay. A little too skittish for the southern bay, so they rejected that as a candidate boat. And so then Sidney Vincent comes into the story. He eventually is going to be the chief naval architect of Newport News shipbuilding. And he had great respect for my grandfather and owned several of his boats, including a starboat. And I think that he had great respect for him and gave him a copy of this book, which is one of the premier yacht design books by Norman Skeen. It's still in publication today, still used in academics and naval architecture, and gave him this prized book, presenting it to a real boat builder in 1930. So that was the respect that he had for my grandfather. Yes, ma'am? No relation. And that's, you remember, maybe you weren't here in the beginning, but there are a lot of Vincents in this story. And so that got confused. Was it Sidney Vincent that designed and built, the Hampton One-Designs? He certainly had a hand in it, and most significantly, he bought the first one and made it available for the club members to sail at will. And the purpose was, let's get a class going for the Hampton Yacht Club, and so that we can all sail and race together in a boat that's the same, test our skills as sailors, right, in a One-Design. So then comes the Hampton One-Design, and again, my dad at the time was 7, and he says, I can remember my dad sitting at the drawing board and then going back to the floor of the shop and laying the lines out, just like he would do in the mold loft, from the plans to the patterns, and then from there making the boat. So I witnessed to the creation of that boat. And my dad said that he would go back to the shop before it was demolished, before the 664 went over, and he could still see the lines scratched in the floor because he didn't draw them. He used a scratch awl to put the lines in. So that was particularly fascinating. So we think this is the Hampton One-Design #1 before it became the Hampton One-Design, because my grandfather had labeled it 18-foot sailboat. So it hadn't even been named the Hampton One-Design yet. So we're pretty sure this is the very first one under construction in the Hampton Roads Boat Works. And so you can see that beautiful boat coming into fruition. And I don't know what was going on, but there's apparently loss by fire or theft there on the sign, and a warning to all that enter from that. It seemed like a good place to go. So there's Hampton #1. And again, we talked about Sidney Vincent. There he is with the cap on, and his 3 sons, Sidney Jr., Jack, and Tom. And so he contracted the name, and the boat was called Jazzito after his 3 sons. And again, it was made available for sailing for the members of the club. And this was, by the way, 1934. So the plans were drawn in 34. Sidney Vincent bought the boat on speculation, and my grandfather built it over the winter of 1935. And so it was ready for sailing by summer of 35. By the end of the summer, there were 5 more boats, and then the following summer, there were 7. So the class was growing, and people were racing. And then, again, a quote attributed to my grandfather. Wasn't the greatest day to go out and sail. Light air, Hampton, designed for light air with a big sail, but he went out sailing anyway. And boats were launched, and people were excited, and the class grew. Some pretty cool shots of the railway in front of Hampton Road Boat Works, and a new Hampton, newly christened, floating out into the small boat harbor. And I see somebody I recognize, gentleman here in the back. And rumor is that that's him right there. Is that true, Mr. Harrell? Is that right? Do I have the right guy? No. I don't have the right guy. Okay. He isn't here. Okay, all right. Somebody told me that this guy was the guy in the picture. So on chance that he was going to be here, I put that in. Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. Oh, yes. Yeah. He's just turned 100. Oh, my. Okay. Okay. So, particularly intriguing photograph. I think it's upstairs. Yeah. Yep. Huge. You'll get a great picture of it. So I want to talk a little bit about boat number 13. And so, Hamptons were generally built in order, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes they'd skip, somebody would buy a plan, they'd never build the boat, and then the boat would come up, later numbers would come up. So nobody wanted number 13, right, because it's 13. But in Italy, 13 is the lucky number. 17 is the unlucky number in Italy. So, and then my grandfather was the youngest of 13 children, and he came over on the 13th day of September 1901 to the United States. So every time 13 came up in something, my grandmother, my grandfather, they were just, I want that. That's that's a good luck number for us. So rumor has it that he had kept the number for himself and then built the boat within a couple of weeks, because there was a regatta on the Potomac called the President's Cup Regatta. And so there were a variety of boats that were racing there. They had different classes. And so the Hampton went out and won the 18-foot and under knockabout class of all the other boats in the regatta. And so there's my grandfather with the cup that he won, first place, and that's upstairs as well, so you get to see that. So he was very proud of that. I mean, obviously, he's in his later years. It's like, I want to show you my boat, and I want to show you my trophy. Because that really launched my career, because then in the northern part of the bay, around Maryland and the Potomac, the Hamptons started taking off there, and there were fleets that were beginning up there. And as my dad said, he won the trophy because the Hampton was fast, and we went by the others like they were standing still. So let's take a break and take a breather and talk a little bit about how we build a Hampton from the ground up. And you'll actually see this structure up front, or upstairs if you haven't seen it already. And what this depicts is a Hampton One-Design ready for planking. And it's sitting on what we call the building jig. And so the building jig is these blocks here go across the jig, and the frames attached to those structures. And some boats are built with steamed frames, so they will bend a piece of wood to make the shape of the hull. But it's a lot easier to build a boat with sawn frames. So you saw the pieces out, you connect them together, and you make the frames. And so that's how the Hampton is constructed. And so this shows the boat ready to put planks on the boat, and they're built upside down. And then my father said he had one speed when building a boat, and that was slow, because he took his time. So these are not the greatest photographs, but I thought they were kind of interesting because they show a few things. So now the boat is still upside down on the building jig, and it has been planked. Okay, so the side planks, the bottom planks, the keel has been placed, and then you can see in the back the patterns for the Hampton One-Design that are hanging, and you'll see a few of those upstairs as well. And then the boat is flipped over, and the deck is finished out. So these are frames that lay the foundation for the deck, and you do some work on the inside as well. And then you can see those sawn frames. They're just kind of bolted together in a V shape. And then just another view of that. And again, some more patterns in the back. And then almost completely finished with the deck beams and the deck planks. Duplicate picture. I wanted to show you this one. The deck's been fully planked now. And then here are the cedar boards that were used to plank the Hampton One-Design. And the particular species is the Atlantic white cedar. And that's what gives it the aroma. And it's a great wood for boat building. You'll also see it from colonial times in Virginia to the modern era. It was used to side houses, and it was used to make cedar shakes for roofs. And the reason is it's extremely rot resistant. The aromatic in the wood keeps insects out and keeps the wood from being worm-ridden, etc. And so it's a great wood for boat building, not only because of that, because it's very easy to plane and to shape because of its soft nature, but still is a very strong wood. And it's used for fine boat building still, if you can find it. But my dad would say that, he would personally select the lumber from the lumber yards, bring it to the boat yard. It would season for several years. Then he would saw it, and then he would resaw it so that it wouldn't bend, it wouldn't warp and contract. So he had a very, very meticulous way of doing things, and also, hey, I need, deck plank number 12, and he knew where to find it in the wood pile. He'd had it already in his mind which one he was going to use. And then, again, apologize for the font there, but he would, he certainly had people working with him, making boats, but he would always do the trim work himself, so the painting and the varnishing, all the fine detail work at the end. And he'd go in on Sunday because the dust had settled right from the week's work, and it wouldn't get into the finish. And then this is one thing my dad always would tell me when I was building something. The difference between a beginner and an expert is a little bit of sandpaper. He said, my dad used to tell me that. So again, a great shot. This shows some of the machinery in the boat shop. This is actually the Hampton shop, I believe. And then a bunch of patterns there hanging in the background. And then really, great shot. This one's upstairs as well. Showing really a trusty worker in my grandfather's shop, Amos Greenlee, who worked with him for years. And then after my grandfather retired, did work around his house. After my grandfather died, helped my grandmother with her garden and all the work around the house. So just a wonderful family friend and worker from the boatyard. But this shows, just really a beautiful Hampton at its last stage, before delivery.
About what year would that be?
So I'm going to guess this is probably the mid-50s. Yeah. And again, a full-service boatyard. I thought this was kind of neat because it showed all the different hardware. And when I wrote my article for Wooden Boat, the editor, Matt Murphy, wrote me back and he said, hey, I remember your grandfather. He was the best source of hardware on that side of Hampton Roads. And so he said I would come over there all the time and buy the hardware from him. So moving into what I call legacies. So as I started off with, all this stuff is, the old days and the craftsmen. And, these boats still live today, still are being sailed. And this was kind of a random place to put this, but I did want to mention during World War II, the Army bought his boatyard and all the materials and employed my grandfather and his workers to build boats during the war. And this shows, one of them that was built. And this Army boats, that sounds safe. But the Army had, you understand this was a port of embarkation for the European theater, and so your men and materials are being shipped overseas, and so you needed thousands of these tenders to go out and bring people back and forth from these cargo ships, troop ships, etc. So that's what he did during the war. And then after the war, he sold that shop, and then he moved to the shop that we're all here for, and that's the Serio Boatyard in Hampton. And so this is a aerial picture of PD Point, which is out there somewhere. I don't know my directions, but now the Mill Creek condominium complex is there. And this pier here, or dock, I guess, still survives. So that was there when my grandfather had his boat building business at 16 House Street in Hampton. So an aerial view of that. And then this is the street view. This is the water view of that shop, showing that it was a railway where he could haul boats and finish them. And then he also built Hamptons, and that was really what he liked to do at that stage of his life. It was maybe lighter work. You weren't hauling huge boats and climbing all over them. So I think he really enjoyed that kind of work into retirement. And so he had one speed when building boats, and that was slow. And so hopefully there's somebody out there in the audience that knows this boat. But so as was happening in the late 1950s, early 1960s, a lot of designs were going from wood to fiberglass. And so they were much easier to build, faster to build. And then they had a particular characteristic that if you capsized a wooden Hampton, the game was over. You had to get towed, and the water had to, come out of the boat. You had to bail the boat. You're out of the race if you capsize a wooden Hampton. But if you capsize a fiberglass Hampton, it floats high, and you can right it and get back in and keep sailing. And so, a bitter wooden boat builder, his quote was, they're okay, but they're cold like a dead body. Just something like a Sicilian would say. And as my father would say, and again, as we talked about the origin of the Hampton, he wanted to build a nice boat for everybody, right? And would I put my children in a Hampton? I'm not sure I would put them in. Maybe in the 30s I might have. But, it's a pretty sporty boat, especially when the wind gets going. And over the years, it's been modified for racing, and obviously as a racing machine, continues to be that today. And this is from my friend Latney Montague, who in 1999 won the Hampton One-Design National Championships in number 609, which was a Serio-built boat that he restored. He was inspired with the Hampton because he saw the Hampton One in Mariners Museum when he was 13, and he said, I want that boat. That's really awesome. So he restored a wooden Hampton and still sails to this day. I think he has 2 sons that are still sailing, and they're winning races. So the legacy continues, and it's being perpetuated through the generations. And he said at the time that he preferred the wooden boat, lose less energy through the waves with a stiffer craft. And I think, he said, I think they're faster. And then, of course, famous in the Hampton class is Charlie McCoy. He started sailing Hamptons like in the late 40s and 50s, and he's still sailing today. He's in his 80s. There he is, right? Oh, in 1960. Okay. But this boat was built in like 1950, I think. 48. Okay. So, and you told me this when I interviewed you. This is this boat is red cedar, is that right? Yeah. Western red, which is maybe lighter, I think, than Atlantic white, but it's harder to work. So my grandfather didn't like that particular wood, but he owned this boat, and it was actually named after my sister, Marky, who's sitting in the front row. And then eventually it went down the line and ended up with Charlie. And it's really good to see you, by the way. I didn't notice you back there. And there's Charlie in number 514, which sails today, and aptly named Calamity Jane. And then in 2009, the 75th anniversary of the Hampton class, there's a wooden boat kind of extravaganza. And so I think boat number 33 was out there, boat number 11. Some very early Serio built boats were there. And there's my cousin Sal on 614. And a particularly nice picture of him and his family sailing in that classic boat regatta. And then we've had wooden Hamptons built. They're still being, or were still being built until recently. Dave Judson in Matthews, Virginia. And I got the opportunity to sail this boat, I believe. Brian, I can't remember the guy's last name. But just the fit and finish, the modern finishes, modern materials, but still in wood. You can make it in plywood or traditional cedar plank. Just amazing, beautiful boat still. And anybody recognize that boat? That's Loafalong. And so Loafalong is now in Beaufort, North Carolina. And so after the wooden boat article, I got some letters from the owners, and so it still sails. It was, I think the last purchase price was around $80,000. So yachts hold their value, and there's an example of the joinery, inside the boat. And I didn't have the picture, but he did send me my grandfather's initials on one of the planks underneath the deck. That was kind of cool to see. I couldn't find it. Got some letters from other folks, John Brothers, delivery day of the Hampton, and then Ted Causey. Ted came to my last lecture here. He worked in the boatyard with my grandfather. And I just thought, this was particularly sweet. Really appreciated your article. Brought me back to that time with that, wonderful time, wonderful man who built boats like no one else. And so, shout out for my grandmother. I haven't talked about it yet. Maggie, Madam Butterfly, had a butterfly collection, picture collection. They were always together. Married 50 years, and they always had a party going on. And here was one where they bought crabs for everybody. And so I can't buy crabs for you, but I can end the lecture and just say, hey, let's go party. Thank you.
How many did he build?
Well, so the number is often quoted as 500. And so remember, other people were working for him. And the way that my dad said, he said, well, he probably didn't do 500 from beginning to end and rig them and all that stuff. He had what my dad would say is something that a craftsman would say. He had a hand in every one of those, meaning he might have built it as a kit. He may have built a hull, not painted it. The owner may have painted it and finished it out the way that they wanted to, rigged it. So, he was kind of he was very prolific during that 1930s to probably mid-1950s when his health started to decline. And then there are other builders involved, and, so there you have it. Other questions?
We have time for questions, or we are going to go upstairs. But before we do anything else, and Vince, keep standing kind of where you were. You kept running off the camera view on me. I was no, you're good right there. Why don't you draw the ticket, and we'll give away that wonderful painting.
And now I have to read it?
Please do.
Okay.
You want me to hold that ticket for you over here?
709699. Anybody?
Well, somebody has to have won it.
All right, hang on a second. Wait a minute.
Here, I'll take over from here.
Here you go.
709699.
And you know what? The lucky, I got it. The lucky 13. These are all. Madam Butterfly always said that all these are threes. 333.
Well, wonderful.
And the 6 is a 3. Anything that comes in threes is close to that 13.
Well, there you go. So I'm glad you won it. So wonderful, and it'll be out there when you're ready to head back. But more questions here, or we can retire upstairs to the gallery, and you can have a look-see around, and we can ask questions up there. But
Any idea of how many boats are in Hampton Roads?
Folks over here that can answer that better than I can. Yeah.
Ones that are racing, maybe 10 to 15 around here. Ones that are sitting around, probably double that number, that just haven't raced in a while. But we actually have our national regatta coming up in 2 weekends. So hope to have probably somewhere between 15 and 20. So going pretty strong.
the trophy for the Nationals is upstairs on exhibit. which reminds me, I have to take it back to the yacht club next week.
There are a number of classic wooden boat classes that are still sailing, all over the country, but particularly on the eastern seaboard. A lot of New York clubs, Connecticut. There's some around Groton, and I was up there one summer and put my name up on the board at the yacht club and said, anybody needing crew, and they took me out on a 20-foot, I can't remember the name of the One-Design, but I mean, it was built in the same era. This is a big era of boat building and wooden boats, and so there's a lot of classes that are still sailing these things out there, probably fiberglass too, but so 10 to 15 is pretty good, I think, for a boat that's 80 more than 80 years old. Yeah.
Why don't you share where the Hamptons are in different museums?
Oh, good.
Mariners.
Good question. Yeah.
And also the Hampton that you say.
Yeah. So Hampton #1 is at the Mariners Museum. It's in the small craft center. It originally was a hull only, and now they have a nice mast and a sail rig there. So that's been beautifully restored. After my father, Vincent Jr., died, again, we talked about all the material that we had. It was sitting in a storage facility. We were paying, hundreds of dollars to store that, and I kind of had to get rid of it, pretty quick. And so we made the rounds of some of the museums, the Mariners, the Hampton Museum at the time, different curator, different people. And didn't get any takers, but I did get a taker at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum in St. Michael's. And that's quite nice museum. They don't have the space for a display at this point there, but my father's boat number 613 is there. The building jig that you'll see upstairs is on loan from them. And then all of the patterns and jigs that he had are still there at Chesapeake Bay. I'm happy because they're in a climate-controlled place and safe. And one of the stipulations that I made was that if people want to copy the patterns, if they want to make a Hampton One-Design, they can go into the archives there and trace their own patterns and reproduce a boat if they want to do so. Haven't had any takers, but the more people I tell, maybe it'll happen one day. And then, of course, Hampton History Museum. Yep. And then again, Alan it's just unbelievable. I mean, he came to Boise, Idaho, spent 2 or 3 days with me, absorbed everything I said. If you watch those videos, it's like, wow, he remembered everything I told him. Just an incredible, exhibit and design. So obviously there's some material here. Hopefully there'll be some in the future. And then, somebody gave me a Hampton One-Design, and I had a network of friends trail it out from Portsmouth, Virginia to Boise, and I spent 6 years putting that back on the water. Leaks like a sieve, but I got a nice little battery-operated baler, and I run it through the centerboard, and I take people out for cocktail cruises, but one day something's going to break. All the original hardware and spars are there from the 40s. So.
Very good. Any more questions? If not, I'll invite you to come on upstairs with us and have a look at the exhibit.
Thank you.
And remember, see, I have to turn on because I'm recording myself. Remember all those things I said about coming back to visit us for the music events, and we'll post our next lecture in the next few days. It's always the first Monday of the month.